Did you ever see?
Yes. Oh, okay. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Erika Mulvenna. I am a fiber artist. I make quilted wall hangings, and I am an educator. I teach people how to sew and how to use color creatively.
I'm interested why that became so central to you, to your creative practice.
I first learned how to use color theory as like a starting point to learn how to mix pigments and dyes. And I was dyeing and printing my own fabrics. So whatever I could imagine, I could make it. I could make the fabric myself. I moved into a house where I no longer had the ability to dye fabrics. And I wanted to start making stuff again. But I was using fabrics that were already colored. All of a sudden, I'm like, whoa, I have to try to make these colors work together when I'm no longer in control of the color. Like, could color theory help me? And I went back to the basis of color theory from back when I was in school, which was Eaton's method, or this,
Right.
typical.
Yeah.
I remember listening to a talk from another textile artist who specifically made stuff based in color theory. And in her talk, she was like, the red, yellow, blue artist color wheel is a lie. I'm like, what is she talking about? So
Yeah.
that's what started me to take a deeper look. And I reread Itton's The Art of Color in his book. He's mentioning these other earlier color
Right.
theorists.
Right. He mentions Goethe and a couple other people.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, I should try to read some of those books. And I went back and I started with Goethe. And I read it. I'm like, why is he so mean about Newton? What is going on? And around that time, I was in a used bookstore and I ran across a copy of Franz Gerritson's book.
Yeah.
That book has this great section on the history of like color constructs in it. My mind was totally blown. I actually made a reading list and I posted it on my blog, and 300 plus years of color theory, the reading list. Reading them in order, I could see how these old ideas traveled through time. It totally freed me from this idea that I needed to use some kind of construct in order to have the best color combinations in my work. I worked in the home sewing industry for a really long time. There were a lot of like quilt pattern makers and quilt teachers that would teach specifically how to use colors in one way, but then people would not feel confident in their own inner color sense.
It's like, I know this works, especially with pigment mixing. I know this works, but then when I try to apply it to these colors, it doesn't work.
Exactly. And plus, primarily the people that were teaching these home quilters how to use color were basing everything on the red, yellow, blue three pigment primary system. But when you're quilting, you're working with found color. In a way, you're restricted because it's what colors do you have on hand?
It is hard to get people beyond that dogma, right?
It is dogma. I mean, look at George Field called it he likened it to the Holy Trinity. It was a divine kind of
just the order of things.
representation. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I decided to teach. When it comes to color systems, process dictates the system. And if your process is purely inspiration, it doesn't matter what system you use ultimately. It's like a personal preference.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
One of the first pieces I made based on color theory was this large piece with these triangles. It's basically an exploration of the red, yellow, blue three pigment primary system. I wanted to see, if I did it in fabrics and I did it with these overlapping, what would it look like? How would the colors kind of interact? Then I moved on to making some pieces with the CMY three pigment primary system, which I kind of liked better because it had some brighter colors in it. I love bright colors. Each of the squares is a different color harmony based on the CMY system.
It's very clear that your creative goals are centered around color. And to see that in fiber arts is just really cool.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So actually the piece behind me, I used solid colored fabrics, but to create the dimension, the depth, I decided to try to use nylon netting that's overlaid on top of the fabric. It was a challenge. But I like to try to find ways to put depth into the quilted piece because it's relatively flat. Like I would love to make a bigger, like explore this idea of using this technique to get more three-dimensional in like a more complex shape. I'm a huge MC Escher fan. I love the geometric aspects to his work and some of the
Yeah.
depth that he gets.
As a fiber artist with some painting training, right, behind that, how do you think your perspective on color is different? How did that actually lead you to develop the visual contrast color wheel?
Using the 3-pigment primary system doesn't really give me the best idea of how colors are going to interact in fabric when I put them next to each other. I really liked Ostwald's system. During the pandemic, I had this retired art teacher from Germany contact me, and he sent me this vintage,
wow,
German Ostwald color wheel.
How cool is that?
I know, right?
Wow.
There's 2 dials.
Triadic, tetradic.
Yes.
Yeah.
His system is colors based in this cone opponent theory: yellow and bluish, purplish, greenish, blue, and red. And those 2 color pairs are like a secondary process of human color vision. When I first read about it, I was like, what does this even mean? What? After I thought about it, it made total sense to me that, we have these color sensing cells in the back of our eye, but to understand that those cells are grouped together in little bundles, and these bundles sense the light as one unit.
The wiring is a little more complex than what we learn in high school. I don't know.
A lot more complex, and a lot more happens, I think, in the brain. For me, to use that kind of a system means that working with found color, my ultimate results are going to hit better with how you perceive it.
Right.
So
your harmonies are based on perception, not based on these older theories that were really about pigment mixing, right?
I started to try to find a color wheel out there that was based in the system that I could use for myself and use to teach, and I couldn't find anything. And I worked with a couple designers to try to get this wheel going. So I just actually got the final wheel earlier this year. Yeah, and then on the back, I have some information about what the wheel is, what it represents, and ways you can use it.
There's how light mixes, how pigment mixes. A lot of people are generally aware that those are kind of 2 different things, but they're not aware that they're both actually subsets of what you're talking about, which is kind of the perceptual color space, right?
Yeah, and then there's also the confusion that if you physically print the RGB system, within it, you can find the CMY system.
I want to show you something that I think you'll enjoy.
Yeah.
So this is completely based on Ostwald, and it was published in the 40s. So you can see it's kind of opponent process oriented. It's kind of mixed up, but here's the blue, violet, yellow, and here's like the sea green, red. It's right in line with a lot of what you're talking about. Yes. Oh, I recently emailed the guy who used to sell those. Are there any left? Like, can I still get that? Nope. And I'm never making more. Sorry.
Oh, I must have emailed him right before you did.
So you have an in-person workshop coming up in May. And what might be like the key goals or the key takeaways?
One, that when it comes to making color combinations in your work, creatively putting color together, you can approach that any way that you like. Number 2, I would like people to have more confidence in themselves, in their own sense of color. Number 3, find some tools to help them explore putting colors together.
I very much liked the way you said confidence in their own sense of color. It's just so interesting to me that the effect of theory on confidence and how it can be so damaging. And so it's really cool to hear that that's so central to your approach.
I also have a lecture, The Secret Life of the Color Wheel, where I go back in time and tell people how we got to this tool, because how much of that is actually scientific.
Right. Where can we find you online?
You can find me either at my blog, which is sewsitall.blogspot. You can find me on Instagram, Erika.Mulvenna. That was really fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you.